This is a Socialist News and Views special interview.
I'm Nick Schillingford, coming to you from the Urban Cabin Studios in South Minneapolis with this special interview. On Socialist News and Views, we let folks introduce themselves. You've been on the podcast a couple times, but it's been a while. You want to just let our audience know who you are?
Sure. My name is Emmett Doyle. I'm a carpenter. I'm a musician. I'm a member of Black Cat Workers Collective. And I've recently released an album of translated anarchist and revolutionary music from mostly across Europe called Mother Anarchy.
Yeah, I was just looking. It was actually almost 3 years since you came on the podcast and talked about Rust Belt Ballads. I was actually just seeing how I even missed like the 12 Blues little album that was in there that I should dig into that a little bit more. But the new one, like you said, yeah, Mother Anarchy by Emmett Doyle and Companions. For folks that listen to Rust Belt Ballads, just tell us how it compares to that, and then tell us at least musically about some of the companions.
Yeah, well, definitely there's going to be a number of differences with Rust Belt Ballads. I've definitely been growing and learning as a musician, as well as an arranger in the time since we made Rust Belt Ballads. And the recording process was very different. Rust Belt Ballads was done in 3 sessions in studio where I just practiced every part that I wanted for the songs on each of the instruments, came in and just did a number of takes on them until we got one that was satisfying enough. And then whatever we got in those 3 sessions ended up being what was on the album. Whereas for Mother Anarchy, we had a much more collaborative process. We had, I think, about, I don't know how many collaborators we had on the album now, but quite a few. The number just kept growing over time as more and more people wanted to get involved. And between that and financial and time constraints, we ended up deciding to do it as a home recorded album. So
it gets expensive.
Yeah, it really does. And especially when you're trying to coordinate, between that many people and that many specialized instruments, it does eventually just become more logical to do a home recording, especially when the goal of the album is not financial. And you know that you're not making what's likely to be a very financially successful product, because obviously radio stations are not clamoring to play
right.
Anarchist propaganda on the air. Some are, which is very flattering, but
right.
So when the work itself is a political project, then certainly there's a lot more DIY ethic that has to go into it. But that's always been the case with political music, and it was definitely a great learning experience for all of us.
And what are some of those instruments or some of those other people that play on the album? What other things did you bring on for this one that you didn't really have the chance to do on the other one?
Yeah, well, so
or to do the way you wanted anyway.
Yeah, for this one we have Sam Adams, the accordion player who was a member of the Wooden Shoe Ramblers, has joined us for this album and is a major part of the sound of many of the songs. Working with an accordion is always both great and challenging, because an accordion is kind of a band unto itself. And so as you're trying to arrange around the accordion, you're having to kind of figure out, well, what niches are available, what niches is the accordion filling. But that's always a great part of it. And so I think that people who've listened to the Wooden Shoe Ramblers album will probably appreciate that about this album, that there's a lot more accordion in it. The fiddle is quite different than the very limited fiddle that there was on Rust Belt Ballads. That fiddle on Rust Belt was played by Matty Ernst, who's a member of Doraine and an instructor at the Center for Irish Music, and was very much in the tradition of Irish fiddle. This time we had my fiddler Miriam, who is a member of The Last Words. And her fiddle style is much more a combination of Appalachian and klezmer influences, which I think really speaks well to the sort of transatlantic nature of the album, the sort of mixed roots that we have going into it. And that's a sound that you'll also hear on recordings by The Last Words, which hopefully will have some studio recordings coming out in the coming years. So far we just have some live work. And then we also had, Mark Trias playing the banjo. He was a member of the Wooden Shoe Ramblers. We have our drummer from my band, the Stepping Razors, Robert Korsmo, sitting in for one song. And our percussionist, Zev O'Rourke, who's in The Last Words, is also sitting in. So in a lot of ways, it grew from being a solo album to really being an album that has both of my current bands and my former band, all sort of collaborating, including Jessica Garraway, who was one of the singers in the Wooden Shoe Ramblers, sings on one of these tracks. So we really got to bring together a lot of people in that way, and a lot of different influences, both from those three bands, but then also from different folk traditions.
Yeah, and I think that really gets good in the next part. It's a great album. My wife gave it to a coworker of hers that is a big anarchist punk fan and sea shanty fan, and really, you mentioned the um, accordion and some of the other stuff, and yeah, that really, it really makes up the fabric of the album there, and it all really works well. Now the internationalism part plays a big role, obviously, well, in the struggle and also in this album. You got the internationale on this album. Talk about the the importance of internationalism, in our politics, but also why it's so important, and how it kind of came together on this album. Some of the neat you tell me about these sometimes, so I know I've heard a few of these before, but tell me some of the neat translations and things on the album.
Well, I think it's very easy for us to fall into the trap of thinking of our struggles in distinct national categories. I think for a lot of us, that's how we think about politics, especially because that's how electoral politics is arranged, right? Is you're electing people to your state and national legislature, things like this. But the tradition of revolutionary politics has always been an international tradition. It's always been revolts popping off in one area and then spreading across the world, whether that be the Springtime of Nations in 1848 or the Arab Spring in 2011, or the George Floyd uprising, which started here in Minneapolis and then spread this reckoning about anti-blackness throughout much of the Western world. And I think that's a huge strength of ours because we're living in an international system of capital, and you really can't try to build the revolution in isolation through really any system. I mean, I think we have various left strategies and left systems, be that Marxism, Leninism, all the way to anarchism, that try to offer solutions for how do you construct a liberated world under siege from imperialism and capitalism. And I think the answer is you don't. You have to expand the struggle, and you have to have an internationalist perspective. And obviously, it's easier said than done. It's easier to sing songs about it than to build those movements. But hopefully, the singing songs about it is part of building the movements. So we have songs from 6 different languages on this album. And those include, off the top of my head, French, Catalan, Russian, Swedish, Italian. There's one other that I'm not remembering right now, but Yiddish, I think. Several Yiddish, actually. And so we really felt it was important both to draw those perspectives from other countries and from other time periods into the lexicon of the American radical song tradition, because America has a great radical song tradition, and the English language more broadly does, because we can't forget we exist in the Anglosphere with such examples as Ewan McCall or Andy Irvine or Dick Gowan. We have a lot of great English language protest singers. And, in the American tradition, we have Joe Hill, we have Woody Guthrie, we have Pete Seeger, that whole line of song. But we wanted to infuse into that some of the perspectives and songs of other parts of the world to encourage people to read up on those struggles, to learn from them, and to think of themselves more as part of an international movement. And yeah, I think that's broadly the perspective that we were looking for, just in terms of doing this project.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's a really good album. Just thinking about the internationalism piece, we went and saw I Love Boosters, the new Boots Riley movie the other night, and finally somebody who's doing a little internationalism, like working class stuff in the movies. I didn't think I'd be sitting in a theater hearing the words dialectical materialism too often. So that was
Well, when it's
interesting.
Boots Riley, you know.
Yeah, I know, but it's just, I was like, okay, all right, cool, all right. So
that famous moment where he's getting interviewed by Amy Goodman. She says, "You as an anti-capitalist," and he goes, "Communist."
yeah, exactly. Yeah, he wants to be clear. So, well, no,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a really good, it's a really great international album, and you did a lot of work on a lot of translations and stuff. Um, I'm sure even more than I know, because you put a lot of work into that, and it's not, and I know from my own little bit of experience and a few other people that I know that have done translations that it's not a simple or straightforward task at all. um, I think my favorite song in the album is the final song, When Anarchy Dawns. I don't know what all went into that song, but do you want to just I don't think I don't think I was familiar with that song at all before, so always nice to hear that stuff. What's the background on that song?
Yeah, so that song was written, I believe, in the late 1800s by Sante Ferrini, who was an Italian individualist anarchist. Um, and its original name is Quando l'anarchia verra. Uh, Honestly, part of the reason that we ended up with that song on the album is when we were putting together the track list, a lot of it was stuff that I had translated in my 20s.
Mm,
And a lot of it was just very balls out militant, extremely grim stuff, martyrdom ballads and things like this. And we looked over the track list. We went, that's a lot of minor key in there. That's just an
yep.
awful lot of E minor going on everywhere. Why don't we find something a little more upbeat, a little more optimistic? And so I was looking through just a list of Italian anarchist songs, listening to them one by one, seeing if one caught my ear. And I really just fell in love with this recording of Quando l'anarchia verrà. That's just this gorgeous, optimistic feeling. That I feel if you spent a long time in social movements, you spent a long time in struggle, you've been through some of the ups and downs, it can be hard to reconnect to that first sort of giddy
Mm,
feeling of hope and
right.
of like real optimism for the future when you're so mired in just the day-to-day struggles of organizing, of just doing it one person at a time, one struggle at a time, one picket line at a time. This sort of mad utopianism that does so much to get us through those times, I think was really something that we wanted to capture. And what surprised me is that um, our album cover artist, No Bonzo, actually liked the song so much that she ended up using it as the basis for the album cover art. We
Oh,
had
nice.
expected the song Mother Anarchy or one of the other songs to kind of be the one that inspired her, but instead she heard that one and it kind of maybe combined elements of a couple of the songs, but that album cover art with the anarchist A in the sun dawning over the mountains as these partisans climb their way up into the hills was very much inspired by that song.
Well, yeah, it's a great way to end the album. Um,
Yeah.
I know, I don't know, I don't always ask ask too many questions of people and that, but I mean, you're an organizer too, in addition to being a fantastic musician, and you've been doing work for a while. And like I said, the last time you were on, and I don't even know. I mean, obviously the album's political. I don't remember exactly how much we got into politics at the time, but I would say it's a way different time now than it was even in 2023 by a few shades. Even it's things are just a little different. And there's lots of new people are getting involved in the struggle, which is interesting to see at different levels, and a lot of very, very new people. What kind of advice, obviously radio safe versions, are you giving folks that are just starting to get involved these days in their community or in community organizing? What are you how
Hmm.
what are you saying to people? Are you seeing new people coming in, and what are I
Yeah,
don't know.
there's definitely a lot of new people coming in. I have a lot of different advice for people. One thing I would say is keep an eye on your capacity.
Right.
Um, as you get more and more involved, it'll be very tempting to take on work far beyond what you can reasonably do. I think it's important to try to choose maybe one or two lanes that you really stick in, and that's what you do for the movement. If you want to do a couple other things on the side, that's fine, but don't become too attached to them, because it might happen that you have to put more energy into the things that you've really decided to take on. I would say it can be very tempting when you get involved in social movements to kind of isolate from the non-political life and push all that away. I think that's a mistake for newer, younger radicals for several reasons. One of which is, I think the best traction and strength that we have is with the established relationships that we already have. And cutting off those relationships to just dive into the activist world actually makes you a less effective organizer. I think also it's important to just have other things in your life that you're doing outside of the activist world, both so that you can maintain your capacity and so that you just don't lose touch with what the rest of society is thinking, because it can be very easy to get just sucked down a rabbit hole, and sort of end up with political conclusions that seem right on theory, but maybe don't actually vibe well with normal working people in your community.
No, definitely true. And you're
Yeah.
always doing something. Well, I've been noticing, I mean, like I said, a lot of very new people, there's always the kind of like reinventing the wheel thing, or like, oh, nothing like this has ever happened before,
Yeah.
kind of a thing. So there's a lot of just like, which is what you're doing with your music and you're doing with your albums anyway, educating people about past struggles, and that we have seen, if not the same, similar things before. And also we've even maybe built similar institutions, and all these all these things have happened. For example, specifically that I'm thinking, the Labor Party that came on the podcast recently that has is starting to form some little whatever in different states. It's like there's been so many different formulations of labor parties, and I don't think they know a lot about any of them. So it's like I'm trying to dig up some of that stuff so we can see what what did we learn? What did we learn, if anything, last time, or what lessons can we draw? No, you sound like you look like you got something else to say on that. Or
well, I was going to say, yeah, I mean, I've been kind of settling into, I guess, my new role as a movement elder.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of a sad thing that by your mid-30s you become a movement elder.
I know,
and I think
right?
that speaks a lot to the burnout and the turnover that happens in our social movements. But it's actually very important to maintain intergenerational organizing. If we don't, then we are constantly reinventing the wheel. And it's important that we have people who've been in previous waves of struggle around, that they're doing the work to educate people, and that younger people coming into that, or just newer people, it can be someone who's quite old but is newly politicized, coming in and learning from those people and being willing to learn from them. You have to remember that theory, whether it's being passed on through a conversation with an older comrade or through a book, is just people who've done similar things to this before, drawing lessons from them and then trying to tell you about them so that you don't make the same mistakes. And that's a gift they're giving you. It's a thing that should be received with grace.
Right.
And I think that's very important. And at the same time, for us older comrades who've been in it for a while, we need to be wary of our perspectives becoming too mired in past factional or sectarian disputes, becoming too stuck in our ways about, replaying the same battles, whether that be with other parts of the left, or whether that be with the state, or whether that be with the company. It can be, I think, very easy to get sort of sidelined into just rigid thinking, when you've been,
or even just our own egos sometimes.
Oh, definitely.
We've been doing it this way for so long, and it's like, when you say like we're going to do it differently, it's kind of like you're like, well, I was doing it wrong or I was doing it not the best way for all that time. And so a lot of people tend to double down on a lot of stuff. And that's what we see when we're trying to convince people of ideas a lot of times, is that they think, well, I did it this way for this long. Why change it now? But sometimes you got to change the way you do stuff. And that's kind of hard. But like you said, honestly, if our movements were really healthy, we'd have like actual intergenerational people that would be telling us this stuff, instead of having to dig it up and read it in books and really.
Well, I guess that's what we're trying to do right now.
I know that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to do it, but it's tough. It's like like you said, there's always more work than you can actually feasibly do. So you got to kind of, like you said, pick something and try to get good at it.
Well, yeah, and that's one of the big differences between ourselves and the forces of reaction. Or the forces of reaction are generally fairly well funded. Some of them not so much. I kind of believe in a three-way fight framework, where I think there are elements of the far right that are anti-systemic, and there are elements of the far right that are pro-systemic, and the relationship between them and the capitalist class is actually a little more complicated than simply, they are attack dogs of the capitalist class. They certainly are.
Wait,
but
nuance, Emmett? Nuance?
Well, yeah,
Come on.
I know, it's scary.
This is not, this is the left here, Emmett. We can't be doing that.
The far right, all of the far right are our enemies. Some of them are also enemies of the ruling class in limited capacities at certain times, right? So,
it's true.
Right, and they have tension, but
yeah, they don't get along. Like a lot of the right does not get along at all. That was one of the things I was disagreeing with in the Carsey Blanton song. The fascists are, I don't know, fascists are good at all these things, but like a lot of those things fascists aren't even that good at. Like they're not really that good at like being on brand or working with their own people. They're actually pretty bad at working with their own people a lot of times.
Oh yeah.
So it's like it's just you don't really know that if you're not there.
Wives, yeah.
You're not there. If you're not there, you don't really know that. But it's like when I was talking to Unicorn Riot people and stuff like that, like that was the whole unite the right thing, was they couldn't friggin' unite. So they're like, we got to have a big thing. Like maybe that'll help, but like that didn't really help either. So So they're not very good at uniting, but they're good at violence sometimes. I mean,
well, they're all right at violence.
They're really not that good at violence. Well, I mean, that's their go-to. Then anyway, let's see. A lot of times,
well, they have very little else.
They don't have a lot of theory.
In all seriousness, though, we should give some credit to the Forces Reaction. They are very well funded, and they actually are very creative, because when you're well funded enough, you can take advantage of new media very quickly.
That's true,
and that is something the far right has done very well. Is taking advantage of the internet, of podcasts, of YouTube, in much the same way that that fascists in the first wave were very effective through the use of newspapers and sort of this information warfare, the sort of meta politics that they conceptualize. It is actually a very important battleground, and for that reason, that's part of why whatever other work I might do as an organizer, the music that I do, the podcasting that you do, is part of that same information struggle, part of that same cultural struggle against basically their attempt to get into the narrative and to make hegemonic their answers to the big social questions facing us, right? They would love to divert our attention from the capitalist class to, the so-called globalists, which is, of course, just code for Jews, and other, deflections like that, right? And so I think putting forward a clear analysis is actually a very important part of our struggle.
Yeah, and then getting people to hear the analysis. That's the part also that we're working on, because again, there's a lot of people that put forward a lot of maybe good analysis or correct analysis, and maybe even clear analysis. But then if nobody ever sees it, then it doesn't help. So we got to get that stuff out there. And I really appreciate all the work that you do, Emmett. And I thank you so much for speaking to me. Is there anything else that you want to say, share, plug before you go? Where can people find you? Upcoming shows, that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I guess first one thing I'd like to share is a little bit of a self-criticism about the album, actually.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I meant to mention earlier, but I think one thing that's going to be true about this album, and I'm not quite sure how to solve this in future ones, is that we did draw almost entirely from European sources or from sources that spoke languages that are rooted in Europe.
Right.
And that's actually a serious problem, because especially as we're trying to explore anarchist history, there's a wealth of anarchist history and radical history more broadly that takes place everywhere but Europe, right?
Right.
Especially, for example, in East Asia, for anarchist history is a huge area that I want to lean into more. The reason that we had to do that is several. One is that simply we don't have in our circle here in Minneapolis a lot of anarchist comrades who are super fluent in the languages that a lot of that music is in.
Right.
And it's not easy to find, for example, the music that the Chinese Assassination Corps was listening to, or the rebels in the Shinmin Prefecture during that struggle by Koreans in Manchuria. It's very hard to find that music and to figure out what they were actually listening to. But then the translation problem is compounded when the language itself is so different than a European language that you might be more familiar with. The poetic style is often quite different than the way that poetry works in the Western canon. But more than that, the musical styles are often just on different scales entirely. It's on microtonal scales that Western instruments can't easily replicate. So I guess I would say that's a self-criticism, but also an offer. If there are musicians and poets who are familiar with those traditions and want to collaborate on future projects, that we can get some more intercultural dialogue happening between the work that we're doing and musical traditions outside of the Western world. that would be something that I would be very interested in and welcome, because we don't want to take an Orientalist approach to that. We want to have that be an actual intercultural dialogue if we end up doing that in the future. In terms of pluggables, we're going to have a benefit show coming up on probably June 12th. It might be the 11th, but it's probably the 12th. We're actually discussing that right now so that we don't double book with another benefit show locally. That will be at the Nottingham Town House venue, the address for which will be on the Nottingham Town Minneapolis Instagram page. And that will be a benefit concert for the support of long-term anarchist prisoners, in honor of the International Day of Solidarity with Long-Term Anarchist Prisoners, started by Marius Mason, which is held every year on June 11th. However, now Marius Mason has been released from prison, so we will continue the tradition of supporting those prisoners, but Marius is in a little less need of that kind of support right now, and we wish him all the best in his adventures moving forward into freedom. Beyond that, if you look at the Nottingham Town Minneapolis Instagram page, there's going to be a lot of house venue shows in the folk punk scene and the radical folk scene coming up this summer. And I would say, let's just leave it at that. There's going to be a lot of projects kicking off, and I'm sure if people just follow that venue and follow our bands, then they'll get introduced to a lot of cool, radical, punky folk music.
Well, that's super awesome, and I appreciate that. Thanks so much for being on today, Emmett.
Absolutely.
This has been a Socialist News and Views special interview.
Tyranny gone, a nightmare from which we were woken, will join in a circle of hands, in struggle and care and in labor, and pull from the gardens we plant, the fruits that together will savor, and from our hearts, the world that we carry will tear apart. Tyrannies we buried and from our hearts.
Quando l'anarchia verrà, tutto il mondo sarà trasformato e nei governi sarà il ricordo d'infame passato, l'aborrito confin sparirà, così pure